The evening sky outside the small town looked calm and peaceful, colored with soft shades of orange and purple as the sun began to set. The streets were not crowded, only a few people walking home after work, and some children playing near their houses, laughing loudly as if nothing in the world could disturb their happiness. Inside one house near the edge of the town, a quiet girl sat on her bed holding her old guitar with both hands. She stared at the strings and rubbed her fingers slowly across them, thinking about the event happening the next day at her local community center. She had been invited to play music there, but the request had been very simple. They only wanted her to perform a basic tune, nothing fancy, nothing grand. People around town did not know much about her. She stayed mostly silent in public, always nervous to speak, and she avoided eye contact with strangers. Her neighbors often assumed she had nothing special to offer. When she walked on the road, no one greeted her first. When she entered a shop, people barely noticed. Teachers used to say she was too quiet to show any real talent. Because of this, most people never believed she could do anything impressive, especially in music. But what nobody realized was how deeply she loved music. She learned to play the guitar as a child, not through fancy lessons or expensive teachers, but by watching videos, reading basic instruction books, and spending long nights practicing alone. Many times she made mistakes so bad that it hurt her ears. Some days she felt hopeless, thinking she would never improve. But over time, she grew better because she never gave up. Her journey with music began years ago when she was a young child. She lived in a house where silence felt heavy. Her parents were kind, but always busy, struggling to earn money and give her a simple life. They loved her, but stress often filled the house like invisible smoke. Even though they never shouted or fought loudly, she could feel the pressure in their voices, in the way they walked, in how tired they looked coming home every night. Music became her comfort. It was like her secret world. When she plucked her guitar or hummed a tune softly, she felt peace. Sometimes she sat alone in her room late at night, playing slowly, closing her eyes, imagining she was on a stage somewhere far away, sharing her feelings through sound. Even though she dreamed of performing, she never really believed she would do it for real. She was always scared of crowds. Whenever she stood in front of people, her voice trembled, her hands shook, and her breathing changed. She worried that everyone would laugh at her mistakes, or worse. She feared that people wouldn't care about her music at all. That fear followed her for years. In school, she never joined the choir, even when teachers encouraged students to participate. She avoided music clubs because she was afraid someone would look at her hands, judge each movement, and tell her she wasn't good enough. She would rather hide in her room and play softly where nobody could hear her. Even at home, she avoided playing loudly because she didn't want neighbors to comment or ask questions. But life has a strange way of pushing people forward. It's when they least expect it. One afternoon, as she sat on a bench near the river, practicing quietly, an older woman overheard her. The woman was kind and friendly, and she organized events at the community center. She walked up to the girl, smiling, and asked her name. The girl hesitated at first, unsure how to respond, but she introduced herself politely. The woman complimented her music and told her about the event. She explained that it was small, simple, and relaxed, not a fancy concert. People from the town would gather to listen to a few local musicians play. The girl felt nervous immediately. Her stomach tightened. The thought of standing in front of even a small group made her palms sweat. But she also felt a strange spark inside, something telling her to say yes. So she agreed. The woman was excited and told her she did not need to prepare a complicated song. Just a basic tune, she said. Something light and simple. Don't put pressure on yourself. Those words stayed in the girl's mind all night. Just a basic tune. It should have made things easier. It should have made her relax. But instead, she sat awake thinking about it. She didn't want to play something ordinary. She wanted to share something from her heart. But she also worried that people wouldn't understand, as she sat with her guitar on her lap that night. She plucked each string carefully. The sound echoed gently in her small room. She remembered learning her first ever song, a slow lullaby she practiced at age 7. She remembered how proud she felt the first time she played a full song without stopping. She remembered crying alone years later, when life felt heavy. How music was the only thing that comforted her. She thought about how quiet she was in front of others. She wished people knew that silence wasn't weakness. It wasn't emptiness. Sometimes silence held more meaning than words. She placed her guitar aside and looked at the mirror across the room. She stared at her reflection. She didn't see confidence. She only saw a girl who had always been in the background, always unnoticed, always underestimated. And then, almost like a whisper inside her heart, she wondered, what if tomorrow could change everything? It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about applause. It wasn't about becoming known. It was about feeling alive. She lay back on her bed and looked at the ceiling. She imagined the people at the event. Some would sit with arms crossed, waiting impatiently. Some might whisper and laugh. Some might not even listen at all. She imagined standing on stage, her fingers shaking, her voice stuck in her throat. But then she pictured something else, a moment where the room turned silent, where each note traveled into the air like a message, touching hearts, telling people who she really was. That thought made her emotional. She wiped her eyes, not sure if the tears came from fear or hope. The next morning she woke up early. The world outside was still fresh and cool. Birds chirped near the window. She opened the curtains and watched sunlight fall across the room. She stretched slowly and reached for her guitar again. She felt calmer than the night before. She decided to practice once more. She sat on the edge of her bed, drew a deep breath, and began playing. The tune she chose was soft, made from simple chords, nothing complicated, yet full of feeling. She played slowly at first, hearing every tiny sound the guitar made. Some notes were not perfect, and she smiled at herself, accepting it. Her fingers grew more confident. Her timing improved. She played again and again, until she could perform the tune without even thinking about the next move. While playing, she remembered the older woman repeating, just something simple. But she wanted more than that. She wanted her music to speak for her. She wanted people to feel something real. She wanted to play a tune that told a story, her story, without using any words. Hours passed quietly. She forgot to eat breakfast, lost in practice. Her fingers felt sore, but she didn't stop. Music made pain feel unimportant. Around noon, she finally put the guitar down, rubbed her eyes, and smiled softly. For the first time, she felt a tiny spark of confidence. It wasn't loud confidence. It wasn't bold confidence. It was quiet, gentle, and honest, just like her. Later, she stepped outside and walked through the town. She passed people going about daily life. Some recognized her face, but not her talent. She walked past a bakery where warm bread smell filled the air, past a grocery store where baskets clinked, and past children chasing a ball. Nobody knew what she was preparing for tomorrow. Nobody knew she was about to stand on a stage and show a side of herself they never imagined existed as she walked. She pictured the moment again and again, the lights, the eyes watching, the silence before the first note. She also imagined failure. She imagined forgetting the chords halfway through. She imagined her hands trembling so badly she dropped the guitar. Her heart beat faster just thinking about it. But each time, the fear overwhelmed her. She whispered to herself, "I will try." Trying, she believed, was enough. She went home and spent the rest of the day preparing quietly. She tuned her guitar carefully. She cleaned the strings. She laid out the clothes she would wear. She practiced walking onto the imaginary stage in her bedroom, bowing politely and sitting down in front of invisible people. It seemed silly at first, but the more she practiced, the calmer she felt. She wasn't trying to impress the town. She was trying to honor her journey with music. Night came again, and she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling once more. She listened to the quiet sounds outside, the wind brushing against the window, distant cars passing on the main road, a dog barking somewhere far away. She felt nervous, but she also felt alive. She realized that this performance was not just about music. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of something more than people believed. Nobody had seen her years of practice. Nobody knew how much she loved music. Tomorrow, she would let them see. And even if they asked her for a basic tune, She would put her whole heart into every note. That night, she whispered to herself before falling asleep, "Tomorrow, I will not hide who I am anymore." She closed her eyes, holding that thought close, and slowly drifted into sleep, ready to face whatever waited on the stage. The morning of the small town's music gathering arrived quietly. The sun shone softly through the thin curtains of her room, spilling warm light across the wooden floor. She woke early, her mind already buzzing with thoughts about the day ahead. The feeling in her chest was a strange mix of excitement and fear, like butterflies tumbling endlessly but calmly, all at once. Today, she would finally step into a place where people were waiting to see her. Even though many of them probably didn't expect much from her at all, she got up slowly, careful not to wake anyone else in the house. Her parents were still asleep, and she knew they were unaware of the nervous storm brewing inside her. They always supported her quietly, never pushing too hard or too fast, leaving her to find her own way. But she also knew that if they could see her now, they would feel proud, even if they didn't completely understand what she was about to do. She dressed carefully in clothes that felt comfortable but presentable, simple and neat, without trying to look like someone she wasn't. Before leaving, she picked up her guitar, the one she had practiced with every day for years. She ran her fingers across the strings gently, tuning it carefully until every note sounded right. The guitar was more than just an instrument. It was her voice, her confidant, and the keeper of her memories. Each string carried stories of late nights spent alone, of struggles she had faced quietly, and of tiny moments of joy she had felt when a song finally came out exactly as she had. Imagine walking toward the community center. She noticed the familiar sights of her town. The same houses, the same streets, the same people going about their routines. Nothing had changed except the weight of the moment pressing on her. She had walked these streets hundreds of times, but today they felt different. Every glance from a passerby felt heavier, as if they could see into her thoughts, even though she knew they could not. Arriving at the community center, she paused just outside the door. She could hear faint sounds from within, laughter, conversation, the clinking of cups and chairs moving. Musicians were already setting up their instruments, and she felt a sudden rush of anxiety. Her hands began to tremble slightly, her stomach twisting as she considered all the things that could go wrong. What if she forgot the chords? What if her fingers slipped? What if nobody cared about the tune she played? She took a deep breath and reminded herself of the hours she had spent practicing. Every mistake, every late night, every moment of self-doubt had led her to this day. She was prepared in a way nobody else could understand. And even if the audience expected something ordinary, she had a chance to make them feel something real. Inside, the community center smelled of polished wood and fresh coffee. Small tables were arranged around the room, and a modest stage stood at the front, barely raised above the floor. People were mingling, chatting quietly, some sipping drinks, others watching the musicians set up. She noticed a few familiar faces from her town, people who often glanced at her curiously or whispered behind their hands. Some were parents of other performers, some were neighbors who didn't know she even played, and some were just regular attendees looking for entertainment. The older woman who had invited her approached with a warm smile. "You don't need to be nervous," she said gently. "Just go out there and play what feels natural. Everyone here is friendly, and they're excited to hear you." The girl nodded, trying to keep her expression calm. She knew the woman was trying to reassure her, but nerves were stubborn and persistent. "I'll do my best," she replied softly. She stepped toward the stage, her guitar strapped over her shoulder. Each step felt heavier than the last, and her mind spun with thoughts of failure and judgment. She could almost hear the imagined whispers. "She can't do it. She's too quiet. Her music won't matter." But she shook her head. She reminded herself of the nights spent alone, the moments she had practiced tirelessly, the hours of pouring her feelings into each note. This was not about showing off. It was about letting the music speak for her. And for the first time, she realized that her audience didn't have to understand every detail of her life. They only needed to feel what she felt. When she reached the edge of the stage, she paused for a moment, taking in the room. The chatter slowly quieted as people noticed her presence. Some looked at her curiously, others smiled politely, and a few didn't notice her at all. Her heart raced, but she found a strange comfort in the anonymity. She was not performing for attention. She was performing for herself. She set her guitar on her lap and adjusted the strap. Her hands shook slightly as she positioned her fingers over the strings. Closing her eyes briefly, she reminded herself to breathe. Slowly, she inhaled, counting to 3, then exhaled. She did it again, feeling the tension in her body loosen just a little with each breath. When she opened her eyes, the room seemed to have transformed. The noise had faded into the background, leaving only the faces of the listeners. Some expectant, some distracted, some curious. She realized that every person in the room had a story, a heart that could respond to the music she was about to play. And that thought gave her a small, powerful spark of courage. She began to play softly, letting her fingers find the familiar chords instinctively. The first notes were gentle, almost hesitant, as if testing the waters. She felt her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm, her breathing matching the flow of the music. The simple tune she had practiced became a bridge between her world and theirs, a message without words. At first, a few people shifted in their seats, glancing around casually, unsure of what to expect. But gradually, the music began to capture attention. The soft, flowing melody seemed to fill the space, drawing everyone closer to the sound. Eyes turned toward her, faces softened, and whispers faded. The audience was listening. She did not play fast or flashy. She did not try to impress with complicated techniques. She played with honesty. Every note carried the weight of her feelings, her quiet struggles, her small triumphs, her moments of hope and fear. It was a story told not with words, but with the language of music itself. As she continued, she felt herself sinking into the performance. Her nervousness melted away, replaced by a sense of connection she had never felt before. The room disappeared. There were no judgments, no expectations. It's only the music and the hearts it touched. She noticed an older man in the front row. Leaning forward slightly, his eyes closed as if he were absorbing every note directly into his soul. A mother holding a child seemed to relax, humming along softly under her breath. Even the teenagers at the back, who initially appeared bored, began to straighten in their seats, intrigued by the depth of emotion in the tune. For the first time, she realized that playing music was not about perfection. It was about honesty. It was about allowing oneself to be vulnerable and trusting that someone, somewhere, would understand. A few notes later, she added a small variation she had not practiced exactly, a gentle flourish that came from instinct rather than planning. Her fingers moved smoothly, almost dancing over the strings. She felt a thrill, a tiny surge of pride and freedom. She was creating in the moment, allowing the music to flow naturally without fear of mistakes. She paused briefly in the middle of the song, taking a deep breath, then continued. The melody rose and fell, soft then stronger, weaving a quiet story that seemed to speak directly to each listener's heart. Some faces glistened with tears, some mouths curved into gentle smiles, and some eyes remained fixed on her, wide with awe. She had never imagined she could make people feel so deeply without even speaking a single word. The room, once filled with ordinary chatter and casual attention, had become a place of stillness and emotion. Her simple tune had transformed the space into a shared experience of feeling and understanding. As the song reached its conclusion, she felt a mixture of relief and longing. Relief that she had played without faltering, and longing because she did not want it to end. The music had become a part of her, and letting it go felt strange. It's like releasing a piece of herself into the world. When she strummed the final note, silence filled the room for a brief, beautiful moment. The audience sat frozen, absorbing the last vibration of the strings, as if afraid to disturb the delicate connection that had formed. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the space. At first soft, then growing louder, until it became a wave of appreciation that swept across the room. People stood up, clapping, some cheering softly, some wiping tears from their eyes. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a quiet satisfaction that went deeper than pride or recognition. She had shared something real, something meaningful. People had responded not because of skill alone, but because of honesty. The older woman approached again, her eyes shining. "You were amazing," she whispered. "You didn't just play a tune. You shared yourself." The girl nodded, still catching her breath. She had never felt so seen, even though she had been standing in front of strangers. For the first time, she realized that music could do more than entertain. It could connect, heal, and inspire. As people came forward to compliment her, ask questions, and thank her for sharing, she felt a gentle pride growing. She had faced her fears, stood in the spotlight, and let her heart speak through the music. And though the tune had started simple, it had become something extraordinary because she had poured herself into it. Walking off the stage later, she felt different than when she had arrived. The nervousness was still there, a reminder that she was human, but it had softened into a quiet confidence. She knew she could face challenges she had once thought impossible. She knew that her voice, her real, honest voice, mattered. And as she stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, guitar in hand, she carried with her the memory of how a simple tune had become a bridge between her world and others. How it had allowed her to be seen and heard in a way that words never could. The evening after her first performance, the girl walked slowly through the quiet streets of her town, her guitar slung over her shoulder. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a soft glow in the sky. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and freshly baked bread from a nearby bakery. She walked without any particular direction in mind, letting her thoughts drift and her mind replay the events of the day. Her performance at the community center still felt surreal. She could remember every moment, the nervous anticipation before stepping on stage, the quiet hush that had fallen as soon as she started playing, the way the audience had leaned forward, listening intently as the melody flowed. She could still feel the connection, the strange warmth of knowing that her music had reached people's hearts in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Even as she walked alone, she could picture the faces of the listeners. The older man who had closed his eyes, letting the notes sink into him. The mother holding her child, humming softly as the tune wrapped around her. The teenagers at the back, who had initially been restless, now looking at her with surprise and admiration. Each memory brought a quiet smile to her lips. She realized that music was not just about performing or impressing others. It was about speaking in a language that everyone could understand, even without words. It was about sharing a piece of yourself and trusting that someone, somewhere, would feel it. That thought made her chest swell with emotion. She had always been quiet, always unnoticed. But tonight, she had been heard. As she continued walking, she thought about how her life had changed in small but significant ways over the past few years. Music had always been her refuge. When the world felt overwhelming, when school was too noisy, or home too quiet, she had turned to her guitar. She had spent hours alone in her room playing softly, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing at the small victories she achieved in her practice. Those quiet moments had built her resilience, her patience, and her love for the art she now shared with others. She remembered the nights when she had stayed up late, trying to master a chord that refused to cooperate. She remembered the frustration and the doubts, the feelings of being too small, too ordinary, too quiet to ever matter. And yet, despite everything, she had persisted. Those small, almost invisible victories had led her to this very moment, where she could touch hearts without even trying to prove herself. The next few days passed in a blur. People from the community began to speak about her performance. Some came to the center again, hoping to hear her play. Others mentioned it casually in conversations, expressing surprise that someone so quiet could evoke such deep emotion through music. For her, it was overwhelming. She never expected such attention. She never sought it. And yet, she felt a quiet pride in knowing that her music had made a difference. Even in small ways, with each passing day, she practiced more intentionally. Not just for herself, but for those who might listen. She experimented with different melodies, letting her fingers wander over the strings, exploring new combinations of notes and rhythms. She learned to trust her instincts, allowing the music to flow naturally rather than forcing it into rigid patterns. The more she played, the more she realized that her creativity was limitless. Constrained only by her willingness to explore and express, her family noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. She walked taller, spoke with a little more confidence, and smiled more freely. They didn't fully understand the transformation, but they saw it and appreciated it. Her parents, who had always supported her quietly, began to encourage her more openly, asking her to play for them at home and praising her dedication. The recognition, even within her own family, felt like a gentle affirmation of her journey. One afternoon, she was invited to perform at a small local gathering, separate from the community center event. This time, it was a more intimate setting, just a handful of people in a cozy living room. She felt a familiar nervousness creeping in, but it was accompanied by a growing sense of excitement. She had learned that fear was not always an enemy. Sometimes it was a signal that something meaningful was about to happen, as she prepared to play. She noticed a young boy sitting near the front, holding a small notebook. He was scribbling something as she strummed her first chords, and she felt a surge of curiosity. Perhaps he was drawing, perhaps writing down notes. Regardless, she felt a quiet connection, sensing that even in his own world, her music had found a way to reach him. The tune she played that day was different from her first performance. It was still simple, still honest, but it carried a subtle complexity born from practice and experimentation. Each note was deliberate, yet fluid, weaving a story of quiet resilience, gentle hope, and hidden strength. She felt her emotions guiding her fingers, her heart shaping the rhythm, and her mind letting go of any lingering doubts. The room grew still, the air heavy with attention and anticipation. She could feel the subtle shifts in energy, the way the listeners leaned forward unconsciously, absorbing each note as if it were part of their own lives. Music, she realized, was a kind of bridge, connecting people across unseen gaps of experience, emotion, and understanding. When she finished, the applause was quieter than the community center, but it carried a depth that touched her more profoundly. The people didn't just clap out of politeness. They clapped because they had felt something real, something that spoke to them in ways words never could. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from nervousness this time, but from gratitude and quiet joy. Over the following weeks, she began to notice small but meaningful changes in her own confidence. She walked into the grocery store without shrinking from people's gazes. She spoke to her neighbors with a little more ease. She even offered to play at school events she had previously avoided, feeling less afraid of the attention that came with performing. Music had given her a voice, not just through her instrument, but through the way she carried herself in the world. One evening, as she sat alone in her room, she reflected on how much she had grown. She thought about the quiet girl who had once trembled at the thought of playing in front of a single person. She thought about the countless nights of practice, the tears, the moments of self-doubt, and the slow, steady progress she had made, and she realized that the journey was far from over. There was still so much to learn, so much to explore, and so much to express. She picked up her guitar and began to play a new tune, one she had been composing in her mind for weeks. The melody was soft at first, hesitant, then grew stronger and more confident with each note. She allowed herself to get lost in the music, letting it carry her through memories, dreams, and emotions. Each chord resonated with her own experiences, creating a story that was both deeply personal and universally understandable. In the days that followed, she received unexpected recognition from people outside her immediate community. Friends of friends, relatives of acquaintances, and even strangers mentioned her music in conversations, expressing surprise and admiration. She did not seek attention, but she began to understand that sharing her gift could inspire others, even in ways she had never anticipated. Despite the growing recognition, she remained humble. She understood that the true value of her music was not in applause or praise, but in the moments when it reached someone's heart. When it offered comfort, hope, or understanding, she continued to practice diligently, exploring new techniques, experimenting with melody and rhythm, and allowing her creativity to flow without restraint. One afternoon, she received an invitation to play at a slightly larger event in a neighboring town. The thought of performing in front of a new audience was intimidating, but she felt a quiet excitement. She had learned to manage her fear, to transform it into energy, and to let it guide her performance rather than hinder it. She knew that each note she played would carry a piece of herself, and that honesty was more important than perfection. As she prepared for this next performance, she thought about the impact her music could have. She remembered the faces of the people at her first performances, the way they had listened, absorbed, and responded. She realized that even the simplest tune could carry profound emotion if played with sincerity. And she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a desire to continue sharing her music, not for recognition, but for connection. The night before the new event, she stayed up late practicing, allowing herself to explore different variations of the tune she would play. Her fingers moved confidently over the strings, creating melodies that were both familiar and fresh. She felt a sense of anticipation and excitement that she had never experienced before, a feeling that something meaningful was on the horizon as she lay in bed. Guitar resting against the wall, she reflected on how far she had come. From a quiet, unnoticed girl who had once doubted her own abilities, she had grown into a musician capable of touching hearts and connecting with people through her art. She felt gratitude for every challenge, every moment of fear, and every late night of practice. Understanding that each had shaped her into who she was becoming, she closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "I am ready." For the first time, she felt that the stage was not something to fear, but something to embrace. It was a place where she could be fully herself, where her music could speak louder than words, and where her heart could reach others in ways she had never imagined. She felt a quiet confidence, a deep sense of purpose, and an unshakable belief in the power of her music. As sleep finally came, she dreamt of the stage, of the audience, and of the melodies she would play. But in her dream, there was no fear, no hesitation, only the music and the connection it created. And in that dream, she understood something profound, that the journey of a musician was not just about playing notes, but about sharing pieces of one's soul with the world. The day of the new performance arrived quietly, with a gentle morning sun spilling across the town and the streets waking slowly. She woke early as usual, but this time she felt a different kind of anticipation, a mix of nervousness and excitement that pulsed through her chest like a quiet drumbeat. Today, she would perform in front of a larger audience, people who did not know her, people who did not yet understand the depth of her music. She felt a thrill, but also a weight, knowing that each note she played would be a reflection of herself. She dressed simply, but neatly, the same way she always had, choosing clothes that made her feel comfortable and confident. The guitar she had practiced with for years rested beside her, strings polished and ready. She touched the instrument gently, feeling its familiar weight, and a quiet calm settled over her. No matter how large the audience or how high her anxiety rose, this guitar had always been her companion, the keeper of her feelings, the one thing that allowed her to express herself honestly as she walked toward the neighboring town. The streets seemed quieter than usual, the world almost holding its breath. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the shy girl who had trembled at the thought of a single listener, to the quiet triumphs at the community center and the small gatherings that followed. She had grown in ways that even she had not fully understood. Each step forward had been small, often invisible, but together they had created a path leading to this very moment, arriving at the venue. She saw that it was larger than the previous stage, with rows of chairs stretching farther back and lights positioned to illuminate the performers. Musicians were already setting up, tuning instruments and checking microphones. The buzz of energy was higher here, a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and expectation. She felt her nerves spike again, her stomach tightening as she took in the room. The older woman who had first invited her to perform was there as well, her warm smile a comforting anchor in the midst of the unfamiliar surroundings. "You're ready for this," she said quietly. "Just play from your heart, and everything else will follow." The girl nodded, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She knew the advice was true, but fear still tugged at her, reminding her that this audience was different. These people didn't know her story. They didn't know the hours of practice, the nights of quiet struggle. They only saw a girl stepping onto a stage, guitar in hand, Ready to perform as she stepped onto the stage, the light shone gently on her, casting long shadows behind her and illuminating the rows of faces waiting in the audience. She felt a rush of nerves, but also a quiet determination. She set her guitar on her lap, adjusted the strap, and closed her eyes for a moment, letting her mind settle. The first note she played was soft, deliberate, and cautious, as if testing the space, feeling the air, gauging the energy of the room. At first, the audience was polite, but quiet, some whispering softly to each other, others leaning forward curiously. Her fingers found the familiar chords, flowing naturally over the strings. The tune she played began softly, almost hesitant, but gradually it grew, filled with subtle nuances and emotion. Every note carried a part of her fears, her hopes, her quiet triumphs, and her deep love for the music. She noticed the subtle changes in the audience almost immediately. People stopped talking, their attention drawn to the music. Eyes that had been wandering slowly focused on her. Some leaned forward slightly, curious to see where the melody would go. Others closed their eyes, letting the sound carry them away. She realized that music was doing what words could not. It was reaching people directly, speaking to something deep inside them, connecting hearts without explanation or effort. As she continued, she allowed herself to fully immerse in the music. She added gentle variations she had not practiced exactly, letting her intuition guide her. Each note became an expression of herself, unfiltered and honest. The melody rose and fell, soft and strong, flowing like a river that carried all her experiences along with it. She felt the fear she had carried for so long begin to melt away, replaced by a sense of freedom she had never known. A young woman in the front row began to weep softly, holding her hands to her chest as if the music had touched a place she could not name. An older man leaned forward, eyes closed, a quiet smile on his face, as the melody seemed to reach into his memories. Even the teenagers at the back, who had initially been restless, were now captivated, their expressions softened, their attention fully on the girl and her music. For the first time, she understood the true power of her gift. It was not about impressing anyone or playing perfectly. It was about connection. It was about sharing a piece of her heart and trusting that someone somewhere would feel it. And tonight, she could feel that connection in every glance, every tear, every gentle smile in the room. As the song approached its climax, she allowed herself to be carried entirely by the music. Her fingers danced over the strings with confidence, creating a melody that was both powerful and tender. She felt the energy of the audience, their silent encouragement and empathy, feeding into her performance, giving her strength. She played as she had never played before, fully present, fully alive, fully herself. The final notes echoed through the room, soft and lingering. For a moment, there was silence, as if the world itself paused to acknowledge what had just occurred. Then, slowly, applause began. At first polite, then growing, until it became a wave of appreciation that swept across the room. People stood, clapping, cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. She felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a quiet pride and deep joy that she could not have imagined when she first picked up her guitar. Years ago, as the applause subsided, she looked out over the audience, seeing the impact her music had made. She realized that her journey was not just about performing, it was about reaching people, touching hearts, and sharing something genuine. She had stepped into a larger world, and even though she was nervous, she had found her place within it. After the performance, several people came forward to speak with her. They asked questions about her music, complimented her playing, and expressed surprise that someone so quiet could convey so much emotion. She felt overwhelmed, but grateful. She answered politely, her voice calm but filled with a quiet strength she had not felt before. Every compliment, every expression of admiration, reinforced the idea that her music mattered, that she mattered. As the room emptied and the lights dimmed, she packed up her guitar and prepared to leave. The older woman approached again, her eyes bright with pride. "You have something very special," she said. "Don't ever forget that. You touch people in ways you may not even realize." The girl nodded, feeling the truth of the words settle inside her. She had always known music was important to her, But now she understood that it had the power to reach beyond herself, to reach others in ways she had never imagined. Walking outside into the cool night air, she felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The streets were quiet, the town bathed in soft moonlight. She carried her guitar gently, feeling its familiar weight, and realized that this was more than a hobby. More than a pastime, it was a part of her identity, a language she could use to connect with the world. For the first time, she felt that she could face any audience, any stage, any challenge. She had discovered not only her talent, but also her courage. She had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, that sharing one's heart could create bonds stronger than words. And she knew that this was only the beginning. She thought about the people she had touched with her music tonight, the young woman, the older man, the teenagers, even those who had listened quietly in the back. She realized that her performance had created ripples, small but significant, reaching far beyond the notes themselves. And that thought filled her with quiet hope, a belief that she could continue to make a difference, one song at a time. As she walked home, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a shy, unnoticed girl who had once doubted her own abilities, to a musician capable of moving others with her music, she had grown in ways that transcended skill. She had discovered strength, resilience, and the transformative power of honesty. And she knew that as long as she remained true to herself, her music would continue to carry her forward. That night, she sat alone in her room, guitar resting against her shoulder, and played softly, not for an audience, not for recognition, but for herself. Each note resonated with her experiences, each chord told a story, and each melody carried the essence of her journey. She closed her eyes, letting the music envelop her, and felt a sense of completeness she had never known. For the first time, she realized that music was not just a way to express herself, it was a way to understand herself, to heal and to connect with the world. She understood that her performances, whether large or small, were not about applause or attention, but about the shared experience of feeling, the quiet exchange of emotion between performer and listener. And as she lay down that night, exhausted but fulfilled, she knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new stages, and new opportunities. But she felt ready more than ever to face them. She had discovered not just her talent, but her voice, her courage. In her place in the world, she fell asleep holding that knowledge close, comforted by the understanding that her music could reach hearts, inspire change, and create connection. And she dreamed not of fame or recognition, but of the quiet joy of sharing herself through every note, every melody, and every song she would play in the days to come.